Um, Thank you everyone for joining us for our full network exchange meeting here. And for today, we've got a policy focus, have a great group of presenters that are going to cover accomplishments, challenges, kind of looking ahead to what they're seeing that's policy related here in the state of Vermont and maybe beyond, and likely beyond. So yeah, so that is our agenda for today is really to cover the landscape of policy work over the last legislative session. And before we do that, I'm going to hand it over to Hannah Baxter. She's got a couple of Farm to Plate Network related announcements and updates, and then Hannah's going to guide us through our presenters as well. So Hannah, take it away.
Thanks, Jake. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. For folks I haven't had the chance to meet yet, hello, I'm Hannah Baxter. I issue her pronouns, Farm to Plate Network Manager here at Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. We've got a tight agenda, so I'll do my best to keep this brief, but just wanted to send out a reminder to everyone that our 15th annual Farm to Plate gathering will be held at Burke Mountain Resort this year on November 20th and the 21st. So it's a Thursday and Friday. And this theme we're centering keep calm and collaborate on, working better together as a region in uncertain times. And wanted to let everyone know that the RFP is out for session proposals. The deadline for the RFP is Friday, August 15th. I'll put the link to that in the chat, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions regarding the RFP. There's my email. Also wanted to send along an update / reminder to people that we have an upcoming site visit on July 24th with our land access and land use topic exchange in partnership with the Vermont Garden Network to visit their new greenhouse at Landry Park in Winooski. And then we'll head down to Ethan Allen Homestead to visit the family room collective garden and the teacher's garden demonstration plot. So there's, I'll include a link to the RSVP form, which please, if you're interested in attending this next week, fill this out by end of day tomorrow, or reach out to Jessica if you have any questions about that. That's their email. Another Farm to Plate update, we have an upcoming climate, environment, and soil topic exchange. We're holding a brown bag lunch on Monday, July 28th from 12 to 1. So this will be a space for open conversation, a chance to check in with each other and share what's showing up in our work related to climate, environment, and soil. So we encourage you to come prepared to talk about like what's exciting, what's challenging, and where you see opportunities for learning, action, or support. And there's the Zoom link for that brown bag lunch.
Just real quick, for the climate brown bag lunch, in the Zoom link, there should be a set of kind of like framing questions of how we're thinking about that brown bag. So it's like not required questions to come with, which is kind of some of the things we're hoping to talk about.
Perfect. Thanks, Jessica. And just before I hand it off to our first speaker, I just want to encourage our network members to utilize the communication channels within the Farm to Plate network to keep in touch and engage with the legislative process. So we really encourage you to post updates and ask questions in our network group listservs, to post events and news items on our website, and to reach out to Jessica if you have anything you want to share in our e-newsletter, which goes out monthly and has a pretty large reach. So just wanted to plant that seed. And yeah, and what Jake mentioned in the chat, including action alerts for everyone to be have visibility on where we can act to address the emerging issues. So before I pass it off to our first speaker, I just wanted to drop the agenda in the chat. We'll be hearing from the Agency of Agriculture, Rural Vermont, Vermont Farm Bureau, the Food Security Coalition, and Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. After each speaker, there'll be a 5-minute Q&A. So I encourage you to raise your hands by pressing the react button on the bottom of your Zoom screen, or type your question into the chat. And I'll give each speaker like a 1 to 2 minute verbal warning so we can stay on track and on time. So without further ado, I'll pass it off to Abbey Willard, the Agricultural Development Division Director at the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets.
Thanks, Hannah. Oh, is that going to highlight my phone because I'm on audio that way? It is. I wonder if you guys can you spotlight? You don't want to just see my name there, do you? There we go. Awesome. Okay, thanks for doing that. Hi, Hannah introduced me. So thanks for having this space to talk about policy. I was asked to mostly just give an update on the state of Vermont budget that was passed for fiscal year 26. It's also an interesting time with kind of the passage of the reconciliation bill and a lot of federal questions coming up. So we may be able to answer some of those questions. Most likely, we'll express that we still have lots of questions ourselves about the implications of the new federal budget on ag and food systems. So, but we'll cover as much of both of those topics we can together. So the governor, Scott, just passed a $9.1 billion state budget for fiscal year 26. It was the big bill, which is H493. The budget included focus in areas that weren't traditionally agriculture. So there was a lot of investment in housing infrastructure, education reform, healthcare support, tax relief packages, and an intention to really increase state revenues in anticipation of federal funding losses and, the unfortunate possibility of an economic downturn that sort of seems to be lingering and there's a fair bit of worry about. But there were some great agricultural wins as well in that $9.1 billion budget. At the Agency of Agriculture, we received just under $1.5 million in 3 different appropriations in support of food security initiatives. H167 was the creation of the Vermonters Feeding Vermonters program at the Agency of Agriculture, and a $500,000 appropriation, which again, builds upon the program that exists at the Vermont Food Bank and has for many years, which is to support local food procurement from local farms and making those available to vulnerable and food insecure Vermonters. So this creates a kind of a permanent program of the Vermonters Feeding Vermonters initiative at the Agency of Agriculture. There was also $450,000 that was appropriated to NOFA Vermont in support of their crop cash and their farm share programs for both for growing season 25 and 26. That's an initiative that NOFA has managed for many years, and there has been state appropriations towards that initiative in previous budget allocations. So that's exciting to see that initiated again for fiscal year 26. And then there was a really strong advocacy support when we learned of the $1.7 million termination of 2 federal programs, the local food, the LFSCC, Local Food and School and Childcare, and LFPA, Local Food Purchasing Assistance Program. So $1.2 million of that was for the support of a local food and schools and childcare program. And the legislature, in response to some strong advocacy, appropriated $500,000 towards that LFSCC initiative, which would, support funding for local procurement of food to schools and childcare facilities. So that there's like a new initiative that needs to be established there. We've done the local food and schools before. The childcare component is something new. So there's a team and partnership that's sort of working on exploring how that $500,000 will be best invested in Vermont. We also saw an increase in the allocation in support for our natural resources conservation districts at the Agency of Agriculture. So they received a $250,000 one-time allocation on top of a $612,000 base allocation for districts. So that was an increase. So overall, $862,000 to conservation districts from the Agency of Agriculture. Those were the big budget items. So relatively small, not huge infrastructure program establishment increases in the agency's budget. But there were a fair number of policy additions and changes that happened. So I'll run through those quickly. And some of these are pretty significant. We can have ongoing conversations about them. And there's many conversations that are already happening that touch on some of these, given the focused attention on conservation programming, on water quality, and on land access. So the Right to Farm bill, which was S45 and became Act 61 upon signing, was expanding and strengthening the right to farm provisions that exist in Vermont. So all 50 states have some right to farm legislation. Vermont had some previous legislation. This bill brought clearer, stronger protections for farms. So yeah, Eric, I didn't speak to the base things that didn't increase in our agency's budget. So yes, the working lands appropriation base was maintained at $1 million, as was our farm to school appropriation and other investments in fairs and the Big E, et cetera. But yeah, I only was capturing kind of one-time and special appropriations. So the Right to Farm bill made some changes that said if farms follow the required agricultural practices, they're not considered a nuisance unless they're found to be neglectful or negligent in some way. Another change is that the burden of proof transitions from the farm needing to prove that they're in compliance with RAPs to the plaintiff or the neighbor needing to prove that the farm has been negligent in some ways. And an additional change to the Right to Farm legislation was that prior to any sort of a lawsuit that may be necessary to resolve a dispute between a landowner, neighbor, and a farmer, there must be attempted conflict resolution through mediation between the landowner, neighbor, and farmer. So really strong strengthening of the farmer rights around this Act 61 that passed. There were 2 housekeeping bills that the Agency of Agriculture had items in, and both passed. There's a variety of changes and administrative adjustments that happened as a part of those housekeeping bill. The 2 pieces that I wanted to touch on was one within H484, which became Act 59, which spoke to some additional legislation around the regulation of fertilizers in Vermont. So there was some improved definitions around plant amendments and an increase in an annual pesticide product registration fee that had historically been $200 was increased to $250. The significance of that is that we haven't seen a lot of fee increases traditionally, and this fee increase was supported because that $50 increase in the registration fee is being used to create a collection program for obsolete and unwanted pesticides working with municipalities. And so because of that sort of effort to generate the dollars towards a new program, the legislature and the administration was supportive of that fee increase. The other housekeeping bill was S124 and became Act 67. And that is where the concentrated animal feeding operation conversation happened and the jurisdiction between the Agency of Natural Resources and the Agency of Agriculture around CAFOs. I am not the expert on either that pesticide fee program, which is really managed out of our farm division, or the CAFO conversation between A&R and Ag, which is really more the expertise of our water quality division. But the quick highlight that I can provide on this Act 67 conversation was that the few changes that occurred in some cases was just clarification of roles and responsibilities and jurisdiction between the Agency of Natural Resources and the Agency of Agriculture. A replacement of the memorandum of understanding that currently exists between ANR and Ag with a new document that's really clarifying ANR's responsibilities for implementing the Clean Water Act and the Agency of Agriculture's responsibilities in implementing non-point source pollution programming on farms. And so that new document is due by September 1st of 2025, and EPA will have, my understanding is, some role in the kind of approval of that new document. So some new partnership conversations happening between ANR and Ag as a result of the passage of Act 67. And then this new bill and act clarifies the regulatory entity in Vermont that's determining if a point source discharge occurs from a large or medium farm is the Agency of Natural Resources. So again, like if you really want to get into the details of that, I think there's other people on the call or within the Agency of Agriculture that can speak to those nuances. I think the other relevant piece for kind of us collectively in Vermont's food system to understand as a result of the passage of that act is the establishment of a community stakeholder group that will address ag water quality related topics and will engage various stakeholders as part of a pre-rulemaking process to make sure that inputs gathered on how best to improve Agency of Natural Resources CAFO program. So I think really engaging community partners as a part of this group and process feels like a pretty important outcome from passage of that bill. And then quickly, H398 created Act 26, which established a disaster recovery loan fund at VETA, Vermont's Economic Development Authority, that allows the provision of loans and other forms of financial assistance to businesses following a disaster event. And so that includes ag and forestry related businesses. So I'll just note that there was a lot of conversations and a lot of advocacy for S60 for the creation of a farm security fund, which did not pass. But again, the revolving loan fund program at VETA did through Act 26, which at least creates the mechanism and an opportunity for some of that disaster support following a natural event to be supportive to businesses. I think the last detail I wanted to offer was H401, which became Act 42 upon passage, which was changes to the food and lodging program at the Department of Health. So again, I think indirectly related to the Agency of Agriculture's work, but very relevant to many of our cottage industry value-added producers and processors. So Act 42 increased the threshold from $10,000 to $30,000 or less in sales for a cottage food industry, which again is like value-added products that are kind of like low risk. So granolas and jams, et cetera, flavored nuts that are now are exempt from needing a license from the food and lodging program at the health department. So I think that's again wanting to allow more room and flexibility for small home-based businesses to be able to do those low risk food production happening at home as opposed to needing to be in a licensed kitchen. So the threshold was raised for certain products, which they have defined in the new law as cottage producers or cottage products to $30,000 sales threshold. So less than that, you don't need a license, or a permit. Above that, you would. And then I would just offer that there's not a full understanding, as I think I started with, around the full implications of the reconciliation bill that passed, or the prospects of a farm bill this fall. So even as the Agency of Agriculture, like we are recognizing we don't have all the answers, needing more conversations with the congressional delegation, needing a little bit of time to sort of take place between the passage of the reconciliation bill and everyone's understanding of the nuances and the implications of that. So I feel like more on that later as we kind of deconstruct that a little bit. But we are already starting our fiscal year 27 budgeting process. So we need to have all of our policy recommendations to the governor's office by September 12th. And so, the like clock starts again as we kind of begin looking at budget and policy and priority recommendations for the next fiscal year and legislative session that starts in January. I will say, just kind of to put the feeler out there, there was also a Vermont Supreme Court case ruling on May 30th of this year that occurred at the Vermont Supreme Court related to a farming operation in the town of Essex that has started to create like a little stir within municipal regulatory authority of overseeing and regulating farms. And so there's a variety of conversations that many organizations on this call and within Vermont are really paying attention to, as this now currently gives municipal authority to regulate aspects of farming that don't relate to water quality. So an acknowledgement that the Agency of Agriculture has the RAPs and we regulate water pollution on farms, but that other aspects of farming could now fall under municipal jurisdiction. So this is a very different, very, very significant change from the ag exemptions that have existed and been understood previously. Last thoughts, I know I'm probably pushing my time limit, Hannah, I'm sorry, is like just thinking about what happens next. So really thinking about what are our relationship building opportunities with legislators. So a lot of new legislators came in last session. There'll be some changes again this anticipated for fiscal year 27 beginning in January. Really needing to understand kind of like what the reconciliation bill and federal implications are on ag and food system and federal funding. And then, as always, I think many of us have talked about really hoping to have an agreed upon unified slate of priority needs within the ag and food system sectors to consider for fiscal year 27. So those seem to be kind of the conversations that I'm hearing and seeing happening over the summer months.
Great, thank you, Abby. Just with the consideration of time and knowing that other folks will probably get more into the weeds of some of the things that Abby brought up, I think we're going to skip the Q&A for this time and go right to Caroline and Graham at rural Vermont to hear their update.
Sure. Nice to meet you virtually here, Hannah, not just on email, and really appreciate everything Abby shared. And many of those items were also on my list, so I'll also try to kind of shorten here what I wanted to say. Maybe just for the sake of introductions, rural Vermont is celebrating 40 years this year, which you might see us at events around the state, I hope so, to celebrate a little bit with us. And yeah, during the legislative session, we really aspire to really monitor basically any bill relevant to the agricultural sector. So this year we covered just about 30 bills. And with that, we still recognize that we, didn't follow and relay everything relevant that was going on. So I also just wanted to, offer kind of a brief summary of what just seemed to us like the most relevant agricultural legislative issues basically this year, 2025 session. Maybe with the caveat that also in our recap, you'll find a whole list of bills that didn't pass this year that could still pass in the 2026 legislative session, as we're just at the beginning of the 2-year biennium. So basically, and I wanted to put some resources in the chat as I go. One, we have this activist toolkit that I'm going to put a link in. And then we also have the end of session recap that we also have as a audio recording. To us, basically, one main theme that stood out was kind of regulatory oversight over farms. Abby had mentioned just the change in jurisdiction and clarification in the jurisdiction between ANR and Agency of Ag. again, that's Act 67. Then the right to farm law, maybe indirectly regulatory oversight, because it is about nuisance protection from for farms from lawsuits, but that protection in law is triggered by compliance with regulations. So also there, maybe there's more work to be done moving forward in that stakeholder group and in the sort of rulemaking process. Let's say what happens if there's a farmer that claims a farm would not be in compliance, but the Agency of Agriculture or the Agency of Natural Resources would be the ones who are negligent in enforcing that. What would be, so to speak, what would be the process then? So I think there's more construction sites and details that are not hashed out by this legislation and this very relevant change. Then an issue that did not come up yet, but that was really relevant to us because it was Rural Vermont members basically that were working with the Senate Committee on Agriculture in seeking clarity that the multi-use of farming structures is exempt from Act 250 permitting. That's an issue that got a lot of support in that committee, but their legislation did not end up progressing. The success we received there was that the Land Use Review Board sort of paused their enforcement and sort of seems like on a process towards settlement there. And maybe it's actually beneficial not to open that can of worms as well. Abbey had mentioned the Supreme Court ruling on farms not being exempt from municipal zoning. So the ruling, let's say we open up this statute around Act 250 and farming structures being exempt, it seemed like there was a motion certainly to be also more regressive there. The proposed legislation we had to kind of counter in the process would have suggested that any event on the farm would need to undergo special event permitting so that there's, so to speak, a push from the environmental community to go in a direction where the activity itself is regulated by Act 250, not just the improvement of or in development of the parcel of land itself. Yeah, and what else? And then I wanted definitely to mention as well, there was huge ambition amongst the legislative body to condemn the ICE arrests of migrants and farm workers in Vermont during the session. House and Senate had issued resolutions on those issues, and lawmakers also collaborated to take action and create the Vermont Immigration Legal Defense Fund. I'll put a link to that in the chat as well. That's promoting that, funding this work is maybe an emphasis to make between the legislative sessions. And then we were asked kind of to underscore just how we set our priorities and how they kind of evolve from beginning of the session and then throughout those month of the session. So as a member-led organization, we strive to represent a huge array of farms and communities, spanning a diversity of situations and identities. And the work we prioritize is basically what's coming to us from our members. And so our members also are the ones who kind of determine part of the strategies we're using, sort of trying to uplift those impacted by the policies we're discussing. And then as staff, we consult, of course, with our board on a regular basis. And every summer, we kind of hash out a roadmap, which work to prioritize moving forward. And then just before every legislative session, we issue a staff course of action, and I'm sharing the course of action of this year, so to speak, and also in the chat. And when you look at that, you can see the work of the Cannabis Equity Coalition has been a huge focus. The Farmer Emergency Relief Funding has been a huge focus. Graham will speak more about that in a minute. And you can also see there that this topic of regulatory oversight and of agriculture was already something we saw coming up on the horizon. And we also see there that kind of organizing with folks that do cottage foods and that do accessory on-farm businesses were organizing priorities as well already before the session. Yeah, and on the accessory on-farm business front, that was basically something that really where members approached us right before the session, that they had this issue related to their multi-use of their pole barn. And we kind of agreed we would not be prepared to kind of comprehensively address everything we didn't like about the accessory on-farm business statute, but that we just wanted to support them in addressing their specific concerns. And then we, as an organization, always organize for these small farm action days, basically giving our members a chance to speak about the issues they're facing directly with the agricultural committees. And Fable Farm and Eastman Farm were both able to participate in those events. And that's how we got to discuss then draft legislation in the Senate. With the end result that the LURB was halting their enforcement action, which is great. And on the cottage food bill, it was a little different. We were still actually in the process of surveying our members that do cottage foods and like how high they wanted to raise the income threshold and what other priorities they might have, because there were also new labeling requirements that just took effect in August the year prior. And there it was our introduction to the agricultural committees, where representatives from the House had shared with us that legislation was going to be introduced. That was H401 that became Act 62. And that's how we got to bring members in also there on Small Farm Action Day and testify on the bill and help progress it. And as Abbey mentioned, in the Senate, it became a little more difficult. They amended the bill. The Department of Health had made recommendations to kind of rule out certain types of foods as cottage foods. Those are foods that require time and temperature control and so on. And we did some action alerts and engagement around that to ensure that basically in the end, Vermonters who do pickles and fermented foods can still produce those as cottage foods. You have to use a certified recipe or have your recipe approved, because also there's just food safety concerns related to pickling specifically, as that is a process that requires temperature control. And as a compromise, those foods that do need refrigeration, let's say your cheesecake, would still need to go under licensure. And it's also a little complex because then there's a whole group of cottage foods that might just not be defined as cottage foods because they do require time and temperature control, but they also might not be baked goods. So they might still be under the old regime of under $10,000. And that's just maybe an area, kind of a gray zone of some sort where maybe there's still going to be some more clarification from the department. And I'll just pass it on to Graham quickly and shut up there.
Cool. Thanks, Caroline and everyone. My name is Graham. I'm the policy director here at Rural Vermont. You see him pronouns. I'm going to start with the national budget reconciliation bill, to be quite honest, because I think this is probably the thing that's going to affect our communities the most over the next year. And this contains many things, from farms, farm workers, environmental impacts. But for now, I just want to communicate our and others in the ag community's concerns about an impending crisis of unaffordable health insurance for the self-employed and farms. Rural Vermont and others authored a brief on healthcare for the farm to plate Vermont Food System Plan of 2020, describing the accessibility, affordability, and quality of healthcare as critical farm issues and as issues that disproportionately affect the farming and farm worker community. And as soon as the end of this year, we'll begin to see the impacts of the federal bill with the loss of subsidies for plans on the exchange. Many farmers and self-employed folks will not be able to afford even the lowest premiums, which carry extraordinary deductibles. And without subsidies, meaning that there'll be no affordable health insurance choices for small businesses or self-employed sole proprietors or farmers through the only two remaining health insurers in Vermont, MVP and BCBS. So on top of the loss of subsidies, we're also seeing BCBS announcing a 20% rate hike probably for 2026, covering particular demographics. We'll see Medicaid cuts phase in over the next 2 years after the midterms, and then things will become even more dire. So again, this is just mentioning the small piece of the healthcare portions of this bill. I know Hunger Free and maybe others will talk to the SNAP cuts, and we have all kinds of things that are coming at people, but this will be a crisis for farmers in Vermont and small businesses. And I think what we already argued in our brief was that this is a farm issue. This is not a tertiary issue. And I think as a community, we need to think more critically about this. We don't have much time. So briefly, the Farm Security Fund, Abbey mentioned, we were all really hopeful about this, but this really sort of falls into the federal section, because the main reason this stopped and so many things are that are asking for funding is because we're expecting a $400 million or more deficit. and lawmakers have no idea where they're going to get money from. They're very nervous about creating new programs and requiring new funding. And this was one of the ones that got stopped at the last minute in the appropriations process, sort of unexpectedly, but with the idea that we can't create a new program right now. We don't know what kind of money we're going to have. We don't know what kind of capacity the agency is going to have or others. And our large coalition that's been working on this, I'm sure many of you are here today, decided let's just put this aside. We'll do some organizing over the summer months. We're going to figure out what happens on July 31st when the legislature reconvenes to talk about this national bill and all the impacts on Vermont, and then we'll determine how to move forward in the next legislative session. So that's the bill on, the Climate Recovery Fund. We continue to work nationally on protecting itinerant slaughters, non-farm slaughter. The Agency of Agriculture has supported that work too, and I won't say much more than that, but if you want to learn more about that, that's ongoing work. I will speak a little more to cannabis because it's not always recognized as an agricultural issue. We worked with and co-founded the Vermont Cannabis Equity Coalition with NOFA-Vermont, Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, Vermont Growers Association, Green Mountain Patients Alliance. And we've always been working towards what we see as essential outcomes and against fundamental inequities in Vermont's cannabis farming community and economy. These priorities include using excise funds to reinvest in communities harmed by the history of criminalization of cannabis through the Land Access and Opportunity Board, directly supporting agricultural land access and housing access through down payment assistance grants and more for historically marginalized communities. As a note, and I saw maybe Eric mentioned this, the LEOB did achieve base funding this year as well, which is important for all of us to know. Public consumption, direct market access for small producers, aspects of agricultural status for outdoor producers, expungement, medical priorities. I don't really feel it's necessary to go into the actual bill that passed this year because it was hollow. But I'd like to communicate to you all that in Vermont, we have a regulated agricultural economy in which the state is profiting off of a product it once criminalized without reconciling the harm it has caused. The producers of the very product must sell through intermediaries. That means wholesale, making it nearly impossible for small producers to be viable. That outdoor producers are not given many of the aspects of agricultural status as other farmers, and I would say including respect. And the outdoor producers are not given many, and that you can only legally consume if you own your own land or housing, which doubles down on the history of disproportionate enforcement and criminalization. So we're working in collaboration with the Land Access and Opportunity Board and others. We need your support to overcome the stigma, the active discrimination, and inequity this community of producers and consumers is facing going forward. People mentioned the Supreme Court ruling, and I just want to say that that's the real right to farm stuff we should be talking about. That's literally about the right to farm. Towns are not going to be able to say whether farmers can or can't farm in places and how they're going to farm. There'll be a patchwork of agricultural regulation across towns across the state. The other bill is really about nuisance protection, but I think we're talking about a right to farm. Like, this Supreme Court ruling is dire, and we're going to have to figure out how to respond quickly by legislatively next session. And I would say ongoing policy development. The neo-nic phase-out began July 1st. There's an ongoing public comment period on BMPs, I believe. I want to add something to the nuisance protection that Abbey didn't mention, and that's that it expands nuisance protection for farmers to cover changes in agricultural activity. So before, if you were like growing blueberries, but now you wanted to like change to be an annual crop producer, that would be covered. And previously, it only covered pre-existing farms or types of farming that were doing before the neighbor was there, for example. And now it's any farm. You can start a farm and you enjoy those protections. So in that sense, new and beginning farmers are given these nuisance protections as well. It's not just protecting legacy farms in the landscape. And I don't know if there's other things I have to share too much right now. Folks mentioned a lot of other things. Maybe that's it.
Great. Well, thank you both, Caroline and Graham. Really appreciate all the work that you do. And maybe if anyone has a direct question for either Caroline and Graham, you can type that in the chat just to save some time so we can move on to hear from Jackie Folsom at the Vermont Farm Bureau to hear an update from them. So thank you, Graham and Caroline, and I'll pass it over to Jackie.
Thanks, Hannah, and thanks for having us on today. I am having internet issues, as often happens up here in Cabot, Vermont. So if I freeze, somebody give me a sign or something, because it's been going off and on. Really quickly, a lot of the things that we've been working on have been mentioned. We do have 3 lobbyists at the State House who, as the others mentioned, do try to watch all the different bills because, as I've always said, agriculture touches everything in the state and everything under the Golden Dome. So sometimes it gets a little crazy trying to follow everything. We were very happy that the the water quality bill passed. We're a little concerned that the Clean Water Act was the floor and not the ceiling, but we are very excited about the stakeholder meetings coming up, and we will be asking our members to attend those with challenges and concerns and try to be involved in that whole piece of it. One of the things that we have always had trouble is getting into the environmental committees, because for some reason they just don't really like to hear from farmers. We've had issues in the past where we've tried to get in on the water irrigation bill, for example, and this year they had a discussion on bear damage. We did finally get into House Environment, so we've started to crack the nut as far as that goes in getting in. We were supportive of the cottage bill, well, I had it as H94. I guess it was another number, H408, because that is really important. And we as rural Vermont have a lot of, yes, Caroline, thank you. We do have a lot of farmers that range from the small homesteading groups all the way up to the large dairy farms. So we do tend to have a big tent. And we were very excited about that passing. One of the things that has not been, and we were part of the coalition that worked on S60, that was the Farmer Emergency Funds for disaster relief. Not real happy that it passed, but with no money. So we'll be continuing to work with that coalition and try to get funding for the farmers. I am glad that Act 26 passed with VETA with disaster loans, but as all of us know, that's not the answer for farmers. We can't afford loans. We just need quick turnaround money when we need it for disasters. One of the things that has not been mentioned and that we're going to be watching next year is the current use bill, the current use program. There were 3 or 4 amendments that were attempted to be made, and they are all still on the wall in House Ag because from what we understand, tax department is going to be coming through with a current use bill that we've been anticipating for a couple years, with changes not only to update the law, but to make some of the changes. And we're very concerned about that because the Ed Fund is in trouble, as everyone knows, and current use directly affects the Ed Fund. So we're going to be watching that very, very seriously. We are going to be working on this with the stakeholders, as Caroline mentioned. We're hoping to be there, and our county meetings come up in September and October. That's when our counties meet to work on policy. And so I'm very interested, Abbey, in working with you guys to set policy for the administration coming up. But I would like to extend an invitation. Last year, Vermont Farm Bureau hosted the Bridging the Divide event. We were very excited that a lot of people on this call did show up for that. And we did come up with a lot of things in the middle that we could all agree on and that we all worked with going forward. And we are going to be hosting that again in October. It might be at the same venue in the big barn, but we're hoping for a little warmer day so we don't have to all rush out to our cars and get warm. But if you'd like more information on the Bridging the Divide and an invitation to that, please get back to me and let me know. In the meantime, the other things that we are also watching besides the current use is the biosolids bill, the PFAS and the sludge issues that are going on. Apparently there are still some farms that are accepting that, and we have concerns about that and concerns about what might happen at the legislature. And we will be watching there. There was an Ag Labor Study Committee last year. They presented a report, but nothing came of it. But I believe there was discussion in Senate Economic Development, which is not normally something that agriculture goes into, but it's becoming more and more important to take part in those conversations. So we will be watching any issues that come out of that committee in regards to ag labor and what they plan about doing on that, as well as watching and being very concerned about the ice issue that's going on our farms up in the kingdom and everywhere else. We're in contact with folks in other farm bureaus in the northeastern states, and it's a huge problem in New York. And we're aware of that. We are also watching, we saw that Heather Darby did a very nice presentation on the neonic bill and some of the research that she's attempting to do, which is not going well because of the weather issues we've had the last couple of years. And we've been in conversations with New York Farm Bureau. Apparently New York is getting ready to do rulemaking, even though the research hasn't been completed. So there's a concern about putting the cart before the horse on what's going to happen with that. And we're watching that very closely. So thank you very much for the invitation at the time. If anybody, again, would be interested in being invited to the Bridging the Divide event in October, just get in touch with me and we'll be glad to have a full house there to discuss ongoing priorities for all of us in agriculture.
Great. Thank you so much, Jackie. And yeah, feel free to send along the information for the Bridging the Divide event. We'll be happy to send that in our e-news and spread it through our network groups as well. Okay, we're back on time, people. We did it. How about we continue to save Q&A to the end just to make sure we hear from all of our speakers. And I'll pass it off to the Food Security Coalition. We'll be hearing from Becka Warren at Action Circles, Autumn Moen from Hunger Free Vermont, Jessica Hayes-Lucas from NOFA Vermont, and Carrie Stahler from the Food Bank. So I'll pass it off to the team.
Thanks, Hannah. That was amazing getting back on time. I want to give Jackie credit for that. That was incredible. So I'm Becka Warren. I use she, her pronouns. I manage the Vermont Food Security Coalition. And this session, the coalition advocated for a set of policies to advance the objectives in the Vermont Food Security Roadmap to 2035. So I'm not going to really talk about our policies. I'm just going to introduce how we chose that set of policies that we were co-advocating for. And then Carrie, Jess, and Autumn will give more information about their work in the State House, our work in the State House. So the coalition is currently 7 organizations. We're in a forming stage. We're still devising our agreements and the structure of the coalition. However, the coalition does exist to implement the Food Security Roadmap to 2035. So that gives us a very clear shared purpose, strategies, which help us choose our policy priorities. And the policy is an important area of our coalition work because it is the state government that's going to make policy choices that will lead to food security in Vermont. So last fall, the coalition, we went through our first official process for the coalition members to submit policies for consideration on a shared policy slate. So those policies needed to be directly advancing a roadmap, strategy, or objective. And we also chose policies which were led by a coalition member, in part because we're still building our capacity. And so Carrie, Jess, and Autumn will speak to how being in the coalition and having the roadmap as a guiding document supports our success or presents challenges. Generally, I'm just going to say I think we had success with almost all of our policy slate agenda, and I can drop, after I stop talking, I will drop the slate. We grew a lot of awareness and some very strong champions for food security in the State House. I would say my experience personally is that legislators are often very excited to see and hear about the roadmap, and that we have actual plans and strategies that they can see and take action on to make holistic food security that centers agriculture. And just to briefly say about our summer and fall work on policy work, we are thinking about the Trump administration as, in addition to all the destruction that's occurring to human lives and the budget and our food system, we're anticipating the legislature is going to be facing unprecedentedly difficult choices that they need support to figure out how to navigate. And so our focus right now as a coalition is to prepare ourselves to support the legislature in making the decisions that they're going to be forced to make, and making our guiding question being, how can we get the best possible outcomes for the people of Vermont? And also thinking about how we can be ready for any opportunities that might arise in the chaos, just in the chaos. So we are really still focused on the destination of food security for everyone who lives here, and we're not going to lose that focus. So it's not a specific plan yet, but it is definitely an intention that we're going to keep working on the best outcomes for everyone. So Carrie, I'm going to pass it to you if you're here. I have the speaker view, so I can't see Carrie. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay,
I was
awesome.
expecting to go last, so I'm like, okay.
Nope, we moved Autumn last.
That's fair.
Okay, take it away, my friend.
Okay. So the food bank's request last year was really squarely an appropriations request. When we walked into the building in January, we were asking for a total of $5 million in support, and recognizing that food security fits into a variety of different committee jurisdictions, and we had sort of bumped up against some challenges around that in the past few sessions. We broke our request into two parts. One was support for responsive readiness, which is really a version of disaster response and recovery work that we have been developing over, the past 5 years through a variety of disasters and crises. And that was $1.75 million. And then the other portion was $3.2 million, generally as support for our network in the form of purchased food and or grant dollars to our network partner organizations. When we got to the State House in January, we had a few very enthusiastic food security legislators who kind of peeled off a portion of that and wanted to focus some of that $3.2 million on Vermonters Feeding Vermonters, a program that we operate that purchases local Vermont food. And so we worked with some folks to help draft a bill to support that program that would end up being a sort of grant process of the Agency of Ag, Food and Markets, and then sort of peeled that funding out. So it really became a three-part funding request that touched on three distinct committees: the government operations committees, the human services sort of / health and welfare committees, and then this local food purchase piece, which was an agriculture committee request. And that strategy seemed to work a lot better for legislators. They could really get their head around each of their pieces, more so than a full food bank request, because I do still think it's hard generally from a food security perspective for every committee to understand. Although I suspect this group is sitting here thinking food security impacts every committee in the legislature, and you're all right. In the end, the legislature did pass a Vermonters Feeding Vermonters grant program bill that became, I think, Act 34 when the governor signed it a few weeks ago. Abbey deserves some huge props for that, for helping us sort of through some of the pieces of that process. That was a new process to me, and a little bit of a new process to a few of the legislators who we were working with. So it was not totally smooth, but the agency was very helpful in helping legislators understand how that could work, and structuring that bill in a way that seems like it should work for all of us moving forward. We were appropriated $500,000 for that program to continue to do local food purchasing. That will not be above and beyond what we were doing in the past. That really supports a continuation of that program. And then, thank you, Jake. There it is. I was Act 34. And then in the end, we did get about $1 million to support our network, and we'll be using that for food purchase to continue to make sure that our partners across the state have the food they need at no cost to them, for folks in their communities. And I will just add, I think one of the interesting pieces about this session, the work that we do at the food bank and the way it intersects with the roadmap, is really that our hope continues to be that a lot of these roadmap priorities are implemented, and it begins to impact the quantity of food we need to distribute and the number of people who are coming to see us at the food bank. And one thing that we realized this legislative session, within the sort of either or mentality of government dollars, we had to really explain that piece. Like, we need this funding for now to help give you time to sort out all of these other important questions that impact food security for people around the state. And so that's really how I look at both the slate and so much of the work that everyone here is thinking about already, is how can we hold the water for the state of Vermont in some ways, while the work gets done to move upstream and sort of address some of these issues closer to where they begin. So I think that's my quick update. Jess, are you next?
I believe so. Thanks, Carrie. Hey, y'all. My name is Jess Hayes Lucas, and I'm with NOFA Vermont. Several folks, thanks, Graham and Jackie, for speaking to and Abbey a little bit too, maybe for speaking to some of the policies that we held that were part of the roadmap. But I'll just quickly kind of go over our take on them. So we held two. The first that I'll talk about is the Farm Security Fund, which I'll have already talked about a little bit. So I think just to wrap that one up, we were really excited. We were really excited about how far it got, especially as such a new piece of legislation, as such a groundbreaking piece of legislation. Some farmer groups from other states have already contacted us and said, "Ooh, tell us more about this and tell us more about what you're doing," because our farmers are really struggling from climate change too. So that's been really exciting to see. It passed the Senate Ag Committee, the Senate, the House Ag Committee, all with full support, and now it's in the House Appropriations Committee, and we really do want to take that extra year to continue to build support so that we're able to get it funded more adequately, like Jackie was speaking to, especially in this climate. And I think that was part of the key benefit. One of the key benefits of working as part of the Roadmap Coalition is that we didn't have to make the case that farm security was a part of food security. These two things aren't in funding tension with each other. In fact, farm security is foundational to food security and to feeding everybody. So that was a real benefit of working with the Roadmap Coalition. And then the second policy, the roadmap policy that we held at NOFA, is the funding for local food security. The programs Crop Cash Plus, and Farm Share. We wanted to get $500,000 in base funding for these programs. We were able to get $450,000 in one-time funding, which is a 50% increase over our funding for the previous year, which is amazing, especially in this climate. And it allows us to run the Crop Cash Plus program. It's enough money to run the Crop Cash Plus program, which means that people are able to come out and use their dollars for proteins and breads and things that are in addition to produce, which just brings more people out to market and gives people a more full diet experience, which we're really excited about. Next steps, I'm actually going to put one in the chat. So this is brand spanking new as of right before this call. So you all are going to be the guinea pigs for it. If it's broken, let's just say this: in all the ways that it's broken that you discover, just send me a note and let me know. You're the very first people to use it. This is our online petition for the Farm Security Fund, which is now Senate Bill 60, the Farm and Forestry Operations Security Fund, technically. So yeah, take it for a whirl and let me know if it works or the ways in which it doesn't. And then looking ahead, we're bracing for the SNAP cuts, and we're just continuing to troubleshoot that, but doing what we can here on state policy. Thanks.
All right.
I think I should hand it to, oh, yeah. Amber.
You're good. I'm going to jump in. I'm Autumn Moen. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm at Hunger Free Vermont. So I just wanted to give a few updates. As Becca said up top, the vast majority, all but one of the items on our collective agenda were held by one of the organizations in the coalition. The one that was not was that we were supportive of an expansion and increased earned income tax credit and child tax credit. And this is led by Public Assets, but Hunger Free Vermont sits really closely in this coalition and working to expand economic security. And this is a big pillar of the roadmap. So that's why we were really supportive of that work. And both of those tax credit expansions did pass. So I know tax credits is probably not the things that we all want to hear in the weeds on, so I'll just give a high level overview. But the earned income tax credit was increased for filers not claiming children. However, the coalition was not successful in expanding this tax credit to any age group. So that's something that the coalition is going to continue to work on in upcoming years. And then the child tax credit was expanded from children 5 and under to children 6 and under. So that gets a few more kiddos in that, and more families will be receiving that tax credit this upcoming year. And there was also a new tax credit created for veterans. So that was all part of the tax credit package that was passed this year that we were supportive of. So excited to see most of those pieces that the coalition was working on pass through and had the support of the Roadmap Coalition as well. And then the item that Hunger Free Vermont was working on that was part of the roadmap agenda was the SNAP Restaurant Meals Program. So we introduced two bills this year, one in the House and one in the Senate, that would instruct the state to opt into the SNAP Restaurant Meals Program. And this, for folks who haven't heard this, I mean, most of you maybe at this point have heard me talk about it, but just quick overview, this allows folks who are disabled, homeless, or over 60 to use, I haven't talked about it in a few months, but it's over 60, to use their SNAP benefits to purchase a hot, ready-made meal at a restaurant. It could be cold too, I guess, but that's the difference between, you know, at a grocery store, folks cannot get hot meals with their SNAP benefits. So it really expands food accessibility for people who need it. And so we were pushing this legislation that would instruct the state to opt into this program because they're a bit resistant to do it on their own. We didn't need a bill to do it, but that's the route that we ended up taking. But it also would have included funding for a position within the Department of Children and Families who could run the program, funding for restaurant startup costs and things like that. Unfortunately, neither bill passed out of committee before the mid-March deadline. So that kind of left the restaurant meals program up in the air going into the session in 2026. And so looking forward, I mean, given all the cuts that are coming to SNAP, Medicaid, other critical programs that's been passed federally, we, as advocates in this space, we're going to have to make some decisions about what we think is best to help people meet their basic needs. And the SNAP Restaurant Meals Program might still be that best path forward or part of that path forward, but it might not be. We don't know at this point, and that's, you know, I think the great thing about working in this coalition and with these people is that we are going to navigate this together and we're going to collectively decide what is the best path forward. And so, like I said, the restaurant meals program might still be like full steam ahead in getting that passed in 2026. It's still introduced. It's still sitting in those two committees, but we might see a different path forward to help people meet their basic needs. It could be cash payments to families. It could be other routes. And we haven't landed on an answer yet because this is all really new and is all unfolding. And there's going to be a lot of harm caused by the bill that was passed federally. And so we just need to reevaluate and see what the best path forward is. But we just know that people are going to have their basic needs met. And that's something that the state's going to need to step in and do. And that will be food, shelter, healthcare are, the big things the legislature is going to need to take action on. So yeah, working with all these folks makes those big, tough decisions not easier, but at least it feels good to be doing it with them and know that we're all in lockstep in whatever we choose to advocate for as we navigate the future. So I don't know who I pass it to after this, but I'm done. So I'm just going to stop.
Thank you, Autumn. Thank you all. We have a little wiggle room in the agenda, so if anyone has an immediate question for one of the four folks that just spoke about the Food Security Coalition, we have about 5-ish minutes if we want to ask those. So feel free to just unmute or type something in the chat, raise your hand.
I do know that Carrie, who was slightly caught off guard, has when we were talking about what to share with everyone. One thing we really want to invite anyone to join all this amazing work that you've been hearing about today from all the presenters. I think I can say that everyone would be excited to have anyone on this call or any of the people you work with join us in the State House to understand and talk with legislators and be there building those relationships. And Carrie had wanted to offer an opportunity to come and do a State House tour and training in the fall. Carrie, do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, so passing it to you.
Totally. I was looking at Hannah's agenda, not ours. That was my pitfall. What we started doing to help train our network partners and neighbors and communities around the state who want to start to get familiar with the State House and feel a little more comfortable in that space is just sort of doing a really basic and simple State House tour. And then we often partner with Action Circles to do a how to talk to your legislator training. We have invited farmers with NOFA and had some folks come through and really get a lot more comfortable and feel able to show up in the State House when there are more urgent things that happen because they've already been there. They know the lay of the land. They know where to hang their coat in the coat room, right? And so I think knowing there are a lot of different organizations on this call, I'm going to work on planning some fall and early winter times to do that. And when we do them during the session, they're on a Monday. When we do them before the session, they kind of happen any day of the week. And I'll put the form in the chat if you're interested or if you want to share that with your, membership or, other people at your organization who you're hoping will feel a little more comfortable in the State House. Feel free. And I think for those of you who are in the State House all the time, it's probably too basic and introductory for you, but this is really a way to get people from all over the place who may not even know that they're welcome in the State House all the time to feel like it is their State House, not just a big special fancy building on a hill in Montpelier. So but drop your name in, drop your email address in, and I can keep you posted when those dates are planned.
Perfect. Thank you, Carrie and Becca. And Graham, go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you all. I love the accessibility of your priorities document too. I was just going to ask you just mentioned, the impacts of the federal funding, and this document says 2025. So, and you've been successful in some of this advocacy work, and I'm wondering how you're seeing going forward, responding to that, and will there be another one of these coming forward, given that consideration of the budget and just the situation on the ground post, as we move forward over the next couple months?
I mean, I can answer that for the coalition, Graham, and I think that that's a really good question. And I think each organization is, I'm assuming rural Vermont too, thinking about this right now in a little bit of a dizzy way of what do we do? Because we're not really, it's unclear what's going to happen at the state level in terms of will there be a session that starts sooner the next January? Will they need to adjust the budget with the emergency board? So I think just listening a lot, paying attention to what's happening in the State House. And then I think, the session in some ways just ended, right? They adjourned at the beginning of June. And so we're really, I guess all I can say is as a coalition, thinking hard and thinking how are we going to be prepared and coming back together now that the reconciliation bill has passed. So I don't particularly have a specific plan. I think when the legislature was on its regular schedule last fall, it was easy to say okay, so we'll get together and we'll have this process for how we're going to decide our share policy slate, and more a little bit as Autumn was implying, thinking about how are we going to talk together and figure out what is the best approach? How do we understand what's happening? I don't know, Carrie and Autumn, Jess, do you want to add anything to what I said, which was sort of a vague non-answer?
No, I just said I agree with you. And I also threw a resource in the chat. I just said this too, but it wasn't directly answering your question, but it was just, about the changes that are coming to SNAP for anyone who needs that or wants that.
I think the piece that I want to add there, Graham, is it's a great question. Part of how we're looking at that intersection between state and federal dollars is to protect the dollars that we were appropriated, right? And I think that's a question everyone who received appropriations needs to really answer for themselves. We work in a space, and you'll understand this, we need to start spending those dollars that were appropriated to the Vermonters Feeding Vermonters program right away, because the harvest season in Vermont is now, right? We can't hit pause and wait and, spend that maybe in January in the same way. And so I think some of that is just questions about how the state budget intersects with our budget and intersects with the work that we're doing, and how the federal budget intersects with all of those pieces. And it's complicated, and it differs for every organization, and it probably differs for every one of your members, right? There's so many pieces to that. It feels really overwhelming. And so one of the things we're trying to do is just continue to do what we need to do in the best possible way and offer the most clarity around why that's important. Which it sometimes gets forgotten in all of these like policy details and like what is going to happen to the Medicaid 115 waiver and how's that going to impact Meals on Wheels, which will impact our blah, 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 it just get like I feel like my head's going to blow up. And the bottom line is, what do we actually need to do to keep supporting, people and organizations and farms and communities across the state? And what do we need the legislature and the administration to understand about why those things need to be continue to be prioritized and why they're important? And how much of the state budget they really are, right? Like the three organizations that we're talking about, it's the money we received is, under $4 million total, right? What is that in a $9 billion budget? It's like it's a clerical error, right? Like it's not that much. So I think some of that is just that bigger perspective too, right? Like that you can actually make a significant impact for people with not a lot of dollars by focusing those dollars where they're really needed and making sure that they get into communities. So I know no one here needs that pitch, but I think when I start to feel that real tension between state and federal money and what the priorities are, I just have to go back to what the priorities were anyway and why. We were not previously operating in a space where it felt like there might be an overflow of money. So it's sort of always been in this like scarcity mindset. It's just now a little bit more exacerbated in a negative way.
Great, thank you, everybody. Jake, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, this is a follow-up question related to this conversation of just from a timing standpoint, is there an understanding of when we may know if the legislature is going to be in a special session? Sort of what is that conditioned on, or what types of information are we waiting on to hear when that might happen, and just to give people maybe a sense of like what to look for or pay attention to?
Jake, is that question for me?
It's for anyone who feels capable of providing any level of insight. I know there's a lot of uncertainty around it, but yeah, to the extent that folks are kind of have their ear to the ground or are paying attention to that, it'd be good. Yeah, good to share.
Becca, I can share what I know if you want.
That would be so helpful, Autumn.
Which isn't much.
I will say the Emergency Board and the Joint Fiscal Committee are meeting on July 31st to do like their mid-year revenue reconsideration. And beyond that, I'm not really equipped to answer the sort of like right up to date answer to that, in part because I just have been on vacation. But Autumn, you go.
Well, that's actually more deep. I was going to just say that I know that they won't be making that decision until after that meeting, but I wasn't even sure what that date was. So you said July 30th. Until they get that, I don't think they'll know for sure, and so we won't know for sure. I did just chat with Honor this morning, and because some of these changes are going to take effect soon, but some of them won't for like a year or 2 years or 4, they're staggered out. And so, yeah, I think early, like at the end of session, when we heard there might be this fall special session, I think there was more of the sense that a lot of these changes could happen sooner. But if they're spread out, there might not necessarily be the urgent need to reconvene in the fall. And I know it's, whether they reconvene is like triggered by a certain amount of federal funding lost. I'm not going to get into details on that because I don't want to tell you the wrong thing, but so they might just not be triggered to come back because of the funding cuts and the timing. If that makes sense. Yeah. So I think we definitely won't know anything until after JFO and whoever meets at the end of the month, but I wouldn't be all that surprised if it doesn't end up happening just because of the staggered effects of the cuts, but take all that with a grain of salt, I think.
Yeah.
Can
Yeah,
I just chime in a little piece that may be helpful information for this group? Even though there are snap cuts that take place more like sooner, a little faster than other ones, right now ESD is still operating under the same understanding prior to the passage of this bill, because there hasn't been any guidance from USDA, and they don't expect that to come until November or December. So there's this huge sort of gap between what passed and the implementation timelines and actual functional guidance from how the USDA wants states to implement some of these things. So that's what's also going to, Economic Services Division of the Department for Children and Families. And so I think that's one of the hard pieces too, is that the state doesn't even have what they need to understand how these roll out to even convey that information in a budgetary sense.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you. That's, I think, provides the right context, and to know that July 3rd, there's some things happening July 30th that will maybe provide a little more clarity around special session or not. Yeah, and I know the Medicaid cuts, I know in particular, are staggered in such a way that we may not be experiencing those impacts till a year or 2 years even from now. So.
All right. Thank you,
July
everybody.
31st, yeah, sorry.
I'm gonna pivot so we can hear from our last speaker of today. Invite Pollaidh Major from VHCB, Vermont Housing Conservation Board, the Director of Policy and Special Projects, to provide an update, and maybe can speak to the intricacies of what we were just getting into. But pass it over to you.
Thanks, all. Good to see you all. This has been an incredibly informative call. So thanks to the Farm to Plate folks for putting this together. I've certainly learned a lot. My name is Pollaidh Major. I'm the Policy Director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. I recognize many of the names in this call because I used to cover food security for Senator Leahy when I worked in his office. So it's good to see some familiar names. So for those, most people will be familiar with VHCB. I can give a brief overview of who we are and how we show up in the State House. So VHCB is a statewide organization that invests in land conservation and working lands, businesses, rural economic development, and housing. And we use a combination of state, federal, and philanthropic dollars to make those investments. To start my update where we started this call, I'm going to start with the budget. VHCB is funded through a share of the property transfer tax that Vermont collects, and so funded through the state budget. And the idea there is, statutorily, we receive 50% of the property transfer tax share. And the idea there is that when we have a hot real estate market, when real estate's really expensive, it makes housing harder to obtain for low and moderate income Vermonters. And it makes land harder to access for Vermonters as well. And so that real estate tax goes up because the real estate market's doing really well. And then the theory is that our appropriation would go up to respond to the challenges that a hot real estate market means for the state of Vermont. So we've seen really strong property transfer tax receipts over the last 5 years because of our real estate market. And so we've seen strong appropriations follow that. It's not a guaranteed thing ever that VHCB receives that 50% of the property transfer tax. And there's a lot of advocacy that happens, especially through the Vermont Housing and Conservation Coalition, which helped found the board in the 80s and still exists today, to talk to the legislature about why communities need to be able to build affordable housing for low and moderate income Vermonters, and why they need to be able to invest in land conservation. Last year, the legislature actually increased the property transfer tax on second homes, so generated a little bit extra revenue with the intention of creating an additional revenue stream, especially to invest in affordable housing. So this year, the governor included full statutory funding for VHCB, $36.9 million in his budget, and that was maintained by the legislature. So that was really strong base funding. And what that means is that VHCB's programs, especially on the ag front, which would be land conservation. A lot of the land conservation we're doing is with farms, especially to help with transfer planning for farms. But also our base funding funds our farm and forest viability program. So working at that farm business side of the agricultural equation as well. And also our READY program, which provides technical assistance to small rural communities that are taking on community development programs. So those three activities that really touch the work of this network are well supported through both the governor's request and the legislature's work this year. And we feel really good about where we landed there. For the last several years, we've received significant one-time dollars to invest in meeting Vermont's housing supply crisis. And that did decrease pretty significantly in the last 2 years. So we received $5 million additional dollars to invest in affordable housing. We've been making about $60 to $90 million of investments per year in affordable housing, and that's really going to decrease this coming year pretty drastically, which is hard to contemplate when we're looking at low-income families having less resources to work with and housing becoming more out of reach for them. But that said, we're going to do what we can with the resources we have. So that means continuing to we support the shelter network around the state to add beds and to improve the quality of shelter. We help network of affordable housing providers build affordable rental housing and also affordable home ownership opportunities around the state as well. And then we have a number of other housing programs we administer, including investments in mobile home parks and a program created a couple of years ago to invest in farm worker housing. And in our May board meeting, we were able to award another $1 million to keep that program open for another year. We've been funding that with one-time funding, so we're glad we were able to do that and know how important that program is, especially right now. So want to continue to build on it as we have resources to do so. And I think the Land Access and Opportunity Board came up earlier in this call. VHCB were the fiscal agent sponsor for the LAOB. And so we're really glad to see that their work has continued and they got base funding of $1.6 million in the budget this year. We also follow the Capitol bill and are included in the clean water section of the Capitol bill. We received $2.8 million through that bill to invest in land conservation that has water quality benefits, and so we're able to put those dollars towards farmland conservation and also farmland retirement, where there are agricultural parcels that are in such kind of water vulnerable regions that it doesn't make sense to farm there anymore. We're able to reimburse a farmer to take those acres out of production, return them to floodplains. So we're really looking at how we can use these conservation dollars to help restore Vermont's floodplains. The other thing that these Capitol bill dollars do is they fund the Farm and Forest Viability Program Water Quality Implementation Grant Program to get funding to farmers to do water quality projects. And so we're glad to see that there was continued funding for that effort as well. We work in the policy space a lot around affordable housing. And so we followed the housing bill closely this year that included a new program to invest in infrastructure that supports housing development. And I think this is really critical. VHCB sits at the nexus of land conservation and housing. And how do we meet the state's housing needs, that 30,000 deficit of homes that we have that we need to create by the end of this decade, while also protecting our important ecological areas, while also restoring floodplains, while also preserving our agricultural base, our prime ag soils. And for us, that's really about density. And we can build really densely where we have infrastructure and where we're able to build off of existing infrastructure. So the program that was created is called CHIP, the Community Infrastructure and Housing, right? Community Housing and Infrastructure Program. And it's a project-based tax increment financing program that allows a developer to essentially use future property taxes that are generated to pay off debt incurred to build infrastructure. It's kind of a financing mechanism to pay for infrastructure for housing. And that will be a helpful resource in the future. Unfortunately, because it's the amount of the revenue generated is based on the difference between the before property taxes and the after property taxes, it generates more revenue. It can pay for more infrastructure when you build higher value homes. So it's in that respect, an incentive to build higher value housing. There is a provision in the bill to give a little bit extra incentive for affordable housing. It's not going to be enough really to have this be something that incentivizes those mixed income communities that we need to see. And so that was a piece of the policy debate that we were really active and a part of, just highlighting the need to both create financing mechanisms for housing, but also while doing so, ensure that there is an equity component and that there's an economic justice component as well. Looking ahead, I think I'll touch on the federal landscape a bit.
I'll also note we'll have a minute left. So if you have a quick summary.
Yeah, I do have a quick summary. Incredibly grim. Two things that we're watching, especially in the budget negotiations that are upcoming. We use a federal program through USDA to conserve farmland that matches the state dollars that we receive, helping those state dollars go further. And that program is one that is in jeopardy, certainly, and is going to need a lot of advocacy to continue. Similarly, we administer housing dollars for the production of affordable housing, and will similarly hoping to see those included in the budget, but really worried about what it would mean if they were not included. And the continuing resolution that passed in the spring decreased the vouchers, rental assistance vouchers coming to the state. And that actually had a negative impact in the amount of funding that we can put into development projects, because it helps leverage debt for those projects. So we're already feeling the effects of these cuts through the CR and then through the reconciliation package, and looking ahead at the budget, really nervous about what this means and the state's ability to backfill any gaps with all of the competing priorities and really important priorities that they have in front of them. So similarly to, I think it was Carrie saying, focusing on educating or Becka, educating lawmakers, helping them prioritize, helping them understand where a state dollar can go furthest. We're going to be working with them to do that in this coming session. Anything else that I can help with?
I will just, out of respect for everyone's time, I'll name it's 12:31. And I just wanted to thank all of the presenters that took the time to share updates with the network today. Really appreciate your leadership and your voice that you bring to the state in support of farm and food businesses. And I think this just, to me, it's like there's just more work to do and ever more growing need to do things in collaboration. So let's stay in touch, and feel free to chat over Farm to Plate listservs and post and stay connected so we can all find alignment to meet the basic needs and to figure out how to stand in solidarity with one another. So I just want to say thank you again. We'll be in touch. We'll send out the recording and the notes to the full network sometime in the next week. And yeah, feel free to, if anyone has any lingering questions, you can stay in the call I'll keep it open for a couple more minutes, but just want to be respectful that people might need to get out to eat lunch or go to the next meeting. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Holly, this is Jackie Folsom from Farm Bureau. I have a question I'm excited that you guys put some more money into that ag labor housing. Can you send me something, or can you tell me really quickly right now how much is in that for this year? And if you're going to do a press release, because it's something we'd like to push out to our members to let them know.
Sure. We made so it's the Champlain Housing Trust administers the program. And so I can check with them, kind of what they had, kind of what's available, what they're looking at rolling out for the next year. Is the award we made was $1 million to continue the program.
Okay, great, thanks.
Let me, if I can pull up their website for it, I can drop it in too, if that would be helpful.
I can probably find it. That's okay. Thanks.
Graham, did you have a question? Or?
Oh, I had a comment, but it's maybe so many people have left. I'm not sure it's worth saying. I think that Abbey was talking, or Abbey, not Willard, Abbey from Food Security was talking about just the need to really support legislators, Vermonters coming home. But I just wanted to provide another perspective on that, which is also to hold policymakers accountable. It's not always a matter of education. It certainly needs to be part of all our actions, but unfortunately, I think based on my experience for a number of years now, people don't always make decisions based on altruism. They do things directly against direct stakeholders' interests repeatedly. They try to conduct quid pro quos with you, pulling into rooms and say, if you don't do this, I'm going to do this. We need to hold people accountable. We're not always just asking for money. We're asking for people to shift structural inequities, which they're implicitly or sometimes explicitly invested in. And that includes like a lot of us, our jobs, our money in working environments. And so I just wanted to put in a thing for accountability. And I don't think the general people across the US or in Vermont are looking for compromise. They're looking for accountability.
Yeah.
That's where I'm going to leave it, I guess.
Thanks for sharing that, Graham. Okay, well,
for organizing the call.
Yeah,
Bye,
thanks for
guys.
being on.